welcome to CoinDesk Live from Chainlink's SmartCon in New York City. I'm Jen Sanasi.
And I am Sam Ewan. Jen, doing it again.
Here we are, we're doing it again. It really feels like Payments Day, Payments Week, all happening here in New York City, the epicenter of global finance.
We were at Ripple this morning. And then we hightailed it where everyone was going to Chainlink, SmartCon, which is where we're at. Amazing room, an amazing facility. So many people downstairs. It's been, I've run into already 5 people I know.
Yep. Just
getting up the stairs, so it's been a great time already.
I know we say this every time you and I are at a live event, but I love the IRL aspect of these events. So much of what we do is online. There are global teams, decentralized teams, all working in these ecosystems all over the world, and we can get them together in cities like this. I think there's no describing the innovation and the conversations that are had. This is the 4th SmartCon.
Correct.
Started in New York, IRL, 4 years ago, I believe, and here we are back in New York.
Full circle, come around, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited for today. I'm a big fan of Chainlink. I think that, when a lot of people were building their own blockchains, I think there was an opening that Sergey and the team took, which was they all got to rely on something. There has to be a single source of cryptographic truth. Chainlink started to build that, and I think 80% of the market. We'll find out very shortly from some of our guests, but really just helping to solve the realities of traditional finance, decentralized finance, single sources of truth. Yeah, I'm just very excited for today.
We're going to have a lot of those folks here at the desk, builders, leaders at traditional financial firms, folks from within the Chainlink ecosystem, really describing how all the pieces that Sam just mentioned come together. Sergey joined you and I on CoinDesk Spotlight, and the way that he is thinking about interoperability in a system that feels very fragmented is I think the piece we need to talk about when we think about the future, right? It's fine to be building in these separate ecosystems, but one day we're going to need them all to work together, and those are the types of conversations we're having here today.
But don't you think you can't have the technical piece and that architecture without a complementary regulatory strategy?
I do think that, Sam. So let's get to our first guest now, Head of Public Policy at Chainlink Labs, Adam Meinhardt. Adam, welcome to the desk. Thanks for being our first guest.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
All right, Sam was just saying we can't imagine the future of finance without having a good regulatory foundation. So much progress has been made in the last year, at least here in the United States. Sam and I travel all around the world doing events like this, and we've seen regulatory progress in those cities we go to as well. From your perspective, what needs to happen next?
I would say the biggest thing for progress in the U.S. right now is really market structure legislation. We really need a broad regulatory framework for all digital assets, exchanges, brokerages, all pieces of the broader crypto digital assets ecosystem. So that's really what we're hoping for to get in the next, let's say, 6 months.
You worked on Capitol Hill for a couple decades. We're seeing a lot of back and forth between the Democrats and the Republicans. How much of this drama is just part of what goes on Capitol Hill, and how much of it has to do with the subject matter and our industry?
A lot of it is very typical of any sort of policy process where you see a lot of actors trying to figure out how to work with each other. And that's what we're seeing. I think what's a little different with crypto is a lot of the players were new to DC and may not have experienced DC like a lot of the other industries have. So I think those are the friction points you started to see years ago. And I think each side is really figuring out how can we talk to each other. So I think that's kind of underpinning a lot of the challenges we've seen.
Adam, I want to get your take on this, and I don't think this is controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is I don't think crypto should be partisan. I think that when you think about the idea of progressive finance, opening up opportunities, financial freedom for all types of people around the world, these feel like core values that anyone in either side of government should get interested in. So how do we try to bring that message to everybody and have them embrace it?
100%. A lot of people actually trace the current dialogue on blockchain back to Occupy Wall Street, which came out of the financial crisis and was really a way to disintermediate traditional finance. So actually at its core, some of the roots allegedly are progressive, extremely progressive, and one would hope that it really is a bipartisan issue without sort of this like partisan rhetoric that you would see in other issues. I think getting it to a bipartisan space is within reach right now. We've made a lot of progress as an industry, both politically, but also education-wise. Industry is broadly engaged, Democrats from the most progressive to the more conservative Democrats, and I think they've made a lot of headway. That education piece is absolutely critical.
I've spoken to a few people recently who said that education gap still exists on the Republican side and the Democrat side, especially when it comes to DeFi. Do you think that's going to hold up market structure?
I don't think that by itself is going to hold it up, because I think the political will is there to get a bill done. I do think on DeFi in particular, it is such a complicated issue technologically, legally, and from a regulatory perspective, that I think to get DeFi right is going to take a lot of education, particularly for Democratic members. I think the viewpoint, not just Democrats, for a lot of people, of what it is really unclear about actually what DeFi is and what it isn't. So I think that is a big challenge now. I think for the bill, the reason I think it may not be a challenge is that it largely could be exempted, which I think that is probably something that's getting closer to coming into view.
As we travel around, we've asked this question to multiple people. I'm wondering, we look at what's happening in MiCA in Europe, and we look at sort of Genius and Clarity here. I feel like when you talk to regulators or folks in each of the jurisdictions that we travel, they kind of gravitate towards one or the other. What do you think is sort of where we're going to net out?
Yep.
Are people going to be a little bit more conservative, a little bit more progressive in how they think about these bills?
I think the way Europe approached it was with a continent-wide strategy that has basically been staged out. From centralized players to stablecoins, they pretty much punted on DeFi. They may get there, but they're implementing this legislation in stages, and they've been pretty successful with doing so. But I think you're right. I think the way people look at Europe now is it's not as permissive as perhaps people thought it would be by having a clear regulatory framework. I think we're seeing that play out. I think the promise of the U.S. is a much more permissive state. I think that's where we're going to end up. I think people are looking at DLT, blockchain technology, not just to underpin financial services, but to underpin a lot of economic activities more broadly. So I think the U.S. model of being more permissive within a regulatory framework is probably going to win, and I think maybe the next thing to note is I think the U.S. leadership in this space is probably going to push an opening up more broadly internationally too. So I think we're already starting to see that in the UK. The EU has said they're going to reconsider things in light of the U.S., America quite literally becoming the crypto capital of the world potentially.
I want to follow with one question. I get asked all the time, and people are saying, oh, crypto companies don't want regulation. They think it's still the open Wild West. And I keep saying, no, they actually really want regulation because it helps them understand how to run their business. What's your response to those who are saying, oh, you crypto companies just do whatever you want?
100%. Most crypto companies are already regulated. It's regulated at the state level. We have seen a lot of these companies come to DC practically begging for stablecoin legislation. You see some of the very same companies, plus exchanges, other industry participants, asking for market structure legislation. The industry wants rules of the road. They want to protect consumers. It's actually in their self-interest to protect consumers, so more people will take up this product. After the stock market crash of 1929, the response was to create the SEC, FDIC insurance, the regulatory framework, which really underpinned the growth in financial services in the U.S. I think these are unlocks for the industry. I think most of the industry sees it that way.
You said it's possible that DeFi is excluded from the market structure bill when it gets passed. What does that mean for DeFi companies?
Yep. The Clarity bill, their version of market structure in the House, did include exemptions for DeFi, both from securities law and commodities law. In the Senate, the legislation is pending. We expect something similar, at the very most, a very light touch approach. I think for DeFi what it means is that this technology can continue to grow in the US without kind of improperly sized or improperly fit regulation that could constrain it. So I think for us, the lack of some sort of regulatory burden is really good for innovation in the US. So I think that's the hope. That's what we hope is the outcome of all of this discussion, is let's just leave it for now, watch it, and if we have to come back to it in years, we can. But for now, it's probably not the right time to put too much burden on it.
All right, Adam, we are going to have to leave it there. We look forward to seeing you around the event later on today. I know that you're speaking. So good luck, and thanks for joining us at the desk.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks,
really
Adam.
appreciate it.
Pleasure.
That was Chainlink Head of Public Policy, Adam Meinhardt. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Want market-moving insights at your fingertips? Download the CoinDesk app for news, prices, videos, and events on the go. Stay ahead of the markets with the Crypto Daybook America's newsletter. Get daily price updates, key trends, and analyses delivered straight to your inbox every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Sign up now at coindesk.com/newsletters. If you're just joining us, we are coming to you live from Chainlink's SmartCon in New York City. We're bringing you conversations with the visionaries and builders defining the future of finance. Our next guest is at the center of it all. Chainlink co-founder Sergey Nazarov joins us now. Sergey, it's wonderful to see you again.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me. Thank you for being at the conference.
Of course, thank you for having us. Now, just set the stage for us. We're here at SmartCon. What do you hope attendees walk away with tomorrow?
I've been hearing from a lot of folks that they really appreciate the combination of DeFi kind of leaders and builders and institutional leaders and builders being together in one place. We've been trying to put that together with the SmartCon conference now for some time. And I think we're finally at a point where both of those groups see enough value in intermingling and learning and talking to each other, and they understand that they're going to be each other's customers. So the first thing is I would hope that both of those groups come away from this conference with a deeper understanding about how they can work together better, because the conference is meant, to bring people together and get them to learn and understand each other, because it's in person. That's much easier to do in person. And then there's a lot of things that got released here at the conference. So the Chainlink runtime environment, we released our white paper on Chainlink privacy and confidential compute. There's just so many things going on in the Chainlink community now. But those two, I would say, are big highlights for me.
Sergey, I want to take a step back. We've known each other for a bit. I went back and watched a lot of your early videos about what you guys were trying to do in launching Chainlink, and really the idea of the single source of cryptographic truth and the importance of that. Now, fast forward, you guys are like 80% of the market on the Oracle side. You really sort of delivered on a lot of those promises. So, how do you think about the growth of Chainlink, where you are today and where you're going tomorrow?
So the amount of different chains and different oracles from Chainlink, like data oracles, identity oracles, bridging oracles, compliance oracles, the amount of systems that now need to be coordinated into a smart contract is massively growing and has grown already to a point where it's very complex. So the reason it takes many months for institutions or many weeks for DeFi protocols to launch these more advanced smart contracts is because there's so many different systems and so many different chains that they all need to coordinate to make that contract successfully work. And so I think the next big frontier for Chainlink is two things. providing all those oracles, all the data oracles, identity oracles, bridging oracles, compliance oracles, AI oracles, because that's a critical component of those advanced contracts. But now with the CRE, the Chainlink runtime environment, we have an orchestration layer where you can actually write out in code how all those different oracles and all those different chains are defined as a single application. So instead of 20 different pieces of code on 20 different chains and 15 different pieces of code for 5 different oracles, you now have one piece of code that defines that application. And then the really exciting thing that we're hoping to do relatively soon, towards the end of this year, early next year, and throughout the coming year with more features, is allow that single piece of code to also give you privacy. So now you can run this really complicated on-chain application, this really complicated institutional smart contract that operates across 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 chains at launch. It uses all the highest grade enterprise and other data that you can want to assure all the people that would use it that it's going to work correctly. It can comply with all kinds of regulatory requirements around identity and any number of things, so it can work in many different jurisdictions. And the really killer feature I'm hoping to push forward relatively quickly is it can also do private computations that can then be proven back on chain, so that you have a lot of assurance that the computation was done correctly, just as correctly as if you ran it on a blockchain. So these are the big next step advancements. And the goal there really is to take these really complex smart contracts that take months to create and condense that timeline down to days or hours, which is what I think will create kind of an explosion in these more advanced contracts coming to life.
Can you give us an example for our audience at home as to what the Chainlink runtime environment will enable? How can they make sense of this very technical topic?
Sure. So let's say you want to, I'll give you 2 examples. Let's say you want to launch a stablecoin. So to launch a stablecoin is relatively complex, but you want your stablecoin to have proof of reserves, to have proofs about what's backing the coin, and you want your stablecoin to comply with the requirements of your regulator for who it can be transferred to. And you want your stablecoin to be usable on 50 chains at launch. You want all that at launch. Now you would have to implement all kinds of things to go on those 50 chains, to get that compliance to work, to get the proof of reserves to work. Or you can write a single piece of code that says, here's my stablecoin, will do proof of reserves, here's the values it checks, here's the API for the reserves from my custodian. Here are my policies that the compliance engine from Chainlink will process against any stablecoin transfer. Here are the 50 chains. Here's the list of chains that I want CCIP, the cross-chain interoperability protocol, to connect my stablecoin into at launch and make it available on those chains at launch, once again, against those reserve conditions and against those compliance conditions. And so now, instead of having to figure out compliance, figure out reserves, figure out how to go on 50 chains, you wrote a single piece of code. But more importantly than that, what I think is really going to happen is we have, I think, at launch, 40 templates. So we have a large number of templates. And one of those templates, I think, will be consistently improving launch a stablecoin template or manage a stablecoin template. That's the first example. The second example is fund tokenization. So let's say you want to launch a tokenized fund. You need a transfer agent, and your transfer agent has to have a transfer agency smart contract. You need identity verification for all the people that are going to buy into and out of your fund. And you need a set of contracts that is going to accept payment for the fund in both, ideally, on-chain payment like stablecoins and off-chain payment like SWIFT payments. Now, you could spend months, in some cases years, to build this. You could go with a provider that's going to take a very large percentage of what it takes for you to make a tokenized fund. Or you could build a tokenized fund or parts of your tokenized fund within the CRE through one piece of workflow code. And then the other really critical thing is that all of these use cases right now, the stable coins, the tokenized funds, a whole bunch of other use cases, don't have any privacy. And once we introduce privacy into the CRE, I think the CRE will become, in many cases, the only way to build some of these things. But privacy, how privacy fits into those 2 use cases is a longer conversation.
I was going to ask you, but it feels like maybe we don't have time to unpack it right now.
That's up to you.
Sergey, what I love about what you guys are building is whether you're a small business startup and you have a great idea, or frankly, you're a traditional finance company that doesn't exactly know how it wants to play yet on chain, you're really giving them a toolkit to be able to launch quickly, easily, understanding, again, a single coding environment to be able to pull all of this together, which I think is what you guys and your team does so well. How do you, when you envision how this is going to be used, the CRE, are there specific use cases? I mean, you mentioned stablecoins, you mentioned tokenized funds, but I think it's also really just the core plumbing of how you bring traditional finance on chain that this helps to solve. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we announced two key use cases, I think today here at the conference. One was between the Central Bank of Brazil and the Central Bank of Hong Kong for global trade flows around soybeans, but the payments were done over CCIP in tokenized Hong Kong dollars and tokenized reals through the Central Bank Strex project. And then there was a lot of synchronization through CRE to electronic bill of lading systems, which are critical for trade flows. So that was a trade flow use case where you had to synchronize with existing systems around bills of lading, and you had to synchronize payment in different currencies. That was announced here. The other one that was announced here was with UBS, where actually they used the Chainlink transfer agency standard and those contracts for their tokenized fund to successfully accept payment and mint new tokenized fund shares. So I think there's, those are just two that were announced here, I think today. I think there's more stuff that I expect coming up relatively soon. And there's been other stuff in the weeks before this conference that we also announced. I think it's just a variety of use cases, right? So tokenized funds are different from trade flows, are different from stable coins, are different from tokenized equity, these are just different ecosystems and categories of tokenization. But the CRE is built to be flexible enough to enable all of them and to eventually also enable them to interact with each other.
Right.
So if you power a stable coin with proof of reserves and automated compliance and cross-chain, that should actually make your stable coin more usable in the trade flows and more usable by more tokenized funds. So our hope really is that as you use CRE, you can build better tokenization of various parts of the financial system, and that better tokenization starts to interact with the other things built inside of CRE as well.
All right, Sergey.
Oh, and I was just going to say to partner up on that, I think what I liked about what you're saying is you think about supply chain, which again is a very complex problem, and you think about stablecoins, which is a very complex problem. And really you're saying these are Lego pieces that we can put together and make those happen. We have a few seconds left. I don't want to get into privacy, but I think what is the importance of privacy in these systems for the future?
It's a hard requirement for a lot of data to be made available to chains. We know that from the many years we've worked with the world's leading data providers. So Standard & Poor's, FTSE Russell, TradeWeb, all announced with us in the last few months through DataLink, putting their data on chain through Chainlink's DataLink. We know from our conversations with them over many years and other data providers that the ability to preserve the privacy of data while making it usable on a chain is a hard requirement. So at the minimum, you get a lot of data on chain that you wouldn't before, and that data enables a lot more use cases. Beyond that, it starts to get really detailed into each specific transaction. For example, in trade finance and in global trade flows, you legally can't conduct a transaction if it discloses certain details publicly about the trade flow. So in that case, certain transactions or categories of goods couldn't be transacted in a public way. They'd only be able to be transacted in a private way. On the trade flow example. On the tokenized fund example, a lot of that is about market dynamics and people not wanting to know, other people not wanting to know what they are doing, that type of thing.
I know we're running out of time, but I'm going to ask you one quick last question.
Sure.
In the world that you're building towards, dig a little bit deeper into that for me. How do privacy and transparency coexist?
Well, the reality is that the level of extremely public transparency with the type of selective privacy that I'm describing don't coexist.
Okay.
What is possible is to prove that a transaction happened under a certain set of conditions, that those conditions are legal, and that those conditions are not taking more money than they're supposed to. or they're not malicious. So that level of proof will remain at a completely public level. Then you get to a place where you have a kind of selective privacy, where you have the on-chain transaction, you have the transaction within, part of the transaction within CRE, that can selectively prove to regulators, to the other parties in the transaction. So not to everybody, but to the others in the transaction that really need to know, frankly. The rest of the world doesn't really need to know. The ones in the transaction are the ones that need proof that the transaction completed correctly. And so you have an ability to do this kind of selective privacy with cryptographically guaranteed transactions still. So the transactions are just as bulletproof as blockchain transactions in the completely public sense. But you can't eliminate certain public disclosure and still have public disclosure. That's not a really compatible, that's just, paradoxical. But you can disclose the part of the thing that the public needs to know. So you can disclose that this is the amount of total value or the amount of bad debt, or not bad debt, or the amount of debt that a protocol has. But you might not disclose exactly who that debt is from, you see? And that might be, something that the protocol wants to do. And then all of the users of the protocol can make an informed decision about do they want to use that part of the protocol or another part of the protocol. But I think it'll definitely accelerate the massive amount of value that can flow in. So I think the benefits of privacy far, far outweigh, any of these issues.
Sergey, thank you so much for joining us at
My
the desk.
pleasure.
Thank you for having us here at the conference. We're going to see you back here again tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
That was Chainlink co-founder Sergey Nazarov. All right, we're off to a strong start, Sam.
That we are. What did you think of this concept of the CRE? I feel like it's a pretty exciting one that I had not heard others talking about in the crypto space.
Yeah, I think, the news broke this morning. We're still learning about it. It comes back to this interoperability, right? How can we build the next iteration of this financial world that we are all operating within with all of these disparate systems? And I think this is the next step.
I couldn't help but listen to that and say, now I just want my AI coding agents to show me how to program within the CRE.
Okay.
And then suddenly I can.
Then you can just.
I can be the next big stablecoin issuer.
I guess you could.
Not financial advice.
You might have some pretty tough competition out there, Sam.
It's quite possible.
All right, let's get to our next guest now. We have Torabi joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
How's the event going so far?
It's been really cool. It's way more packed than I anticipated. I don't know if you've been to other crypto conferences. I'm sure you have.
We just came from one.
Okay.
Yeah, literally just came.
Yeah, and it's pretty packed. Much more institutional than I expected, which isn't a bad thing. It's a great thing. And I think that's probably going to segue into some of the topics we're probably going to talk about today. Yeah.
All right, you are the CEO of Move Industries.
Yes.
Talk to us about Move Industries. There's been a little bit of a rebrand lately. So talk to us about what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was one of the founding members at Movement Labs. And essentially, when we decided to do this rebrand, we pivoted to Move Industries, and I stepped in as CEO, took over those roles about 9 months ago now. I was going to say 6, but it's been a long time. Time passes.
It's crypto.
We joke and say the years are short and the days are long. So it's one of those types of situations.
Right.
But yeah, so essentially, we're going to be pivoting to a L1, and I'm sure we'll get to that as well. Yeah.
I mean, you're speaking later today, it looks like, on a panel about on-chain equities, why tokenization is finally clicking. Why do you think tokenization is clicking right now?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'd probably say it's Trump. When you have a government that's not being antagonistic towards crypto and towards tokenization, you'll naturally get more people gravitating towards it. Secondly, I do think that the rails are much better now, so there's much stronger infrastructure that can handle these type of products, let's call them. And then also, there's just more money in crypto. So, for example, if you're going to trade Tesla stock, you want to go where there's enough liquidity. So obviously, you're now competing with Robinhood, and you're competing with these other big players. So you need to have a lot of liquidity there. And now that we see we're trillions, right, in market cap, it's much more interesting. And then also, I would say, we started with stablecoins, right? So the US dollar is the global reserve currency of the world. And so we have already known, this is maybe, some would argue, the only true product market fit of crypto. is the US dollar being tokenized. And then secondly, we saw the proliferation of yield-bearing stables. Obviously, you have Maple Finance, Ondo, Athena. They're all here. I saw the CEOs are all here. They're speaking on panels. And so I think that's step 2. And then step 3 will be potentially getting stocks on chain. Although those are the equities I'm least bullish on right now.
Why?
Well, first and foremost is when you build a product, I think in crypto we have this knack for building products before there's problems. And so the question is who are we building these tokenized stocks for? Now, the obvious use case is people can use as collateral and borrow against it. But if I have, let's say, $1 million worth of Tesla stock, would I necessarily use that to do DeFi looping shenanigans, right, with the smart contract risk? And then secondly, who are the people that don't have access to it today? Most of the time, if you're very wealthy, even if you're not wealthy in the United States, everyone has access to these stocks. Open a Robinhood account, life is easy. If you're not in the United States and you're wealthy, you can find a way to get exposure. So it's essentially the global south, and let's call them non-sophisticated investors who don't have very high net worths that would even want to access it. And is that a group of people worth pursuing? Now, I know I'm simplifying it, and there's probably people shaking their fists at the air as I say this, but this is what I've seen as someone on the ground, right, who's more crypto native than I am TradFi native. Yeah.
I speak to a lot of crypto brands that are trying to build in the space. And, when you guys launched, there was some issues that came up with the launch. But I think crypto sort of loves a redemption story and a hero story. I mean, the amount of people who called ETH or Bitcoin or Doge out, and then look where we are. What did you learn from those moments, and how are you really strengthening what you're doing at Move to really make this the company you envision it to be?
Yeah, I think it was Hasib from the chopping block from Dragonfly, and so he had mentioned that almost every successful crypto company has their religious moment, like right when they're on the brink of death, and it's all over. They resurrect from the ashes.
They rise from the
ashes.
ashes.
They rise from the ashes.
Phoenix.
The savior comes in, and they're able to turn it around. And for us, I mean, Solana had the $8 moment. Bitcoin had a lot of moments, and then Ethereum.
Maybe one today, actually.
Yes, yeah. We're going through some today. Today's a tough day in the market, but for us, obviously, I was anticipating it would be much later. Unfortunately, it happened way earlier. But I guess we get it out of the way sooner rather than later. And I think that from our side, one of the things I'm really bullish on is, our team. So our team, first and foremost, we always joke vibes. Vibes short for vibrations. And vibrations, they start internally and exude externally. And so for us, my number one goal when I first took over was making sure the team is all on the same page. And one thing that probably the KPI I'm most proud of is we have over 90% retention rate of team over the last 8-9 months, which is pretty impressive, I would say, because that's just hard to get in crypto in general, just because every day there's a new chain that raised $100 million that's throwing out big offers to everyone, and the market goes up and down and tokens and all that stuff. So to answer your question, having a team that's dedicated and being able to move towards a consumer-centric world that obviously we're heading towards. We saw with Robinhood, saying that they're going to, going crypto, right, and having their own chain. So anyways, so that's our vision.
Why pivot to a layer 1?
That is a great question. Well, first and foremost, it's like at the end of the day, no one cares whether you're L2, L1. All you care about is, does the product work? Is it easy to use? And so in order for us to get to that stage, we decided that the L1 is the only way. So our original infrastructure was kind of a hodgepodge of different things. A lot of it was just to chase this alignment narrative. So in crypto, people, they kind of have to choose their gang, right? Because you have to say, I'm affiliated with Ethereum or I'm affiliated with Solana, so that you kind of get their support implicitly or explicitly. And so we kind of had that at the beginning, and we realized that although it sounds good, it doesn't work well. And so that's why we decided to pivot towards L1 and have a full stack. And it's faster, cheaper, better, easier to build on. Our builders are happy. So at the end of the day, no one is really upset. And all that really matters is, does the product work? So that's essentially why.
I mean, you mentioned earlier, there's a ton of institutional finance and TradFi here and a lot of great developers and builders. As you're meeting folks, and discussing them, what's your message about what Movement Labs is doing?
So I think, for the most part, I don't see much of a tech moat across these different chains, right? Like everyone comes and they'll give you a one-liner of why our chain is different. But ultimately what really matters, in my opinion, is distribution. There's very few projects that can't do something on one chain that they can do on another chain. So what it comes down to is community, distribution, and having products that people want to use. The greatest example, obviously, is Polymarket. Does anyone necessarily care that it's on Polygon? No. Maybe a few people do, but they use it because it's a good product. And so what we want to do eventually is get to the point where we're invisible and no one cares. That's great. We're just going to be on the back end. Just like when people use Apple Pay, they don't know all the financial wizardry and engineering that goes on in the back end. They just know I can pay really easily. I don't need to carry my wallet with me. Life is good. And so that's what we're chasing, essentially.
When you were talking about the layer one, you were saying cheaper, faster, easier to build on. When you think about attracting builders into your ecosystem, as you kind of rebuild this brand and this new chain, how do you think about attracting them against all the other layer ones who say the same thing?
Well, I think if you think about the builders that you're chasing, essentially you see that most technology, the innovation happens from young people that are just playing around and tinkering, hobbyists, right? And so when you think about young people, there's two things they want. They want to be, first is they want to be able to make some money. And there's two essential ways to do it. One is the ability to raise capital. So if they're able to go into ecosystem and see that there are VCs or investors who are willing to support builders in the ecosystem, that's like one prong. The second prong is maybe they don't need investors, but there's so many users that they can actually build something and find PMF. No one wants to build a hotel in the desert, except for I guess Vegas. But you want to build where people are, right? And so for us, we want to make sure that we're going to start from both sides, right? Bring users, but at the same time, create an environment where they believe there's economic upward mobility. Because ultimately, these are like 19 to 25, 26-year-olds that are kind of building these things. And so what are they looking for? They want to buy mama a house. They want to get a nice car. And so how do they get there? So those are the main things that we have to focus on as an ecosystem.
Torab, thanks so much for joining us at the desk. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
That was Move Industry CEO Torab Torabi. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Want market-moving insights at your fingertips? Download the CoinDesk app for news, prices, videos, and events on the go. Stay ahead of the markets with the Crypto Daybook America's newsletter. Get daily price updates, key trends, and analyses delivered straight to your inbox every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Sign up now at CoinDesk.com/newsletters. Hello, and welcome back to CoinDesk Live. We are coming to you from Chainlink's SmartCon. Now, we've been talking about the what and why of tokenizing real-world assets. Our next guest is focused on how to do it compliantly and at scale. We're joined now by Dennis O'Connell, the president of the ERC 3643 Association. Hello.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I think people watching at home are hearing ERC 3643 and wondering, what is it? So let's just start from the beginning. What's ERC 3643 and how does the association come into the conversation here today?
Wow, what a great question. And thank you so much for having me. Yeah, ERC 3643, everyone's seeing it much more and more, even to my surprise. So 3643 is like the next ERC 20, something that like is so easy. If I say to your audience, ERC 721, we know NFTs. If ERC 20, we know fungible tokens. Well, believe it or not, Ethereum actually had a permission token standard, which was the 3,643rd request for improvement that became ERC 3643. And it took almost 3 years for ERC 3643 to go through the review process and finally made final status, meaning it's in the canon of tokens just like ERC 20 or 721 or all the other great token standards. And it's around permission tokens.
Can you define for us what does permission tokens even mean?
Great question. So ERC 20 and 721, they're all about representing our unit of account or value on a ledger, right? So whether it's a non-fungible or fungible, it's all about having an address to a UINT, and you could freely trade that. But in some cases, regulated cases, where we need all that extra stuff, we get into the world of permission tokens, and there's good and bad things about that. The good thing is we're able to meet regulatory compliance. So ERC 3643 has been approved in 23 different jurisdictions around the world. It has won an innovation exemption from the SEC, and has been tokens featured in over 12 different banking and finance projects, including with many central banks. Why? Because they care about identity, registry, compliance, and control. Now, if you're looking at ERC20, you don't need those things because you're what we call permissionless. But in the permission case, we need that extra stuff to make sure that how those tokens are moved are within control.
Give us an example. You said this token standard is being used all over the place, some central banks. How is it being used by a central bank?
So we have lots of use cases with these different governments. A lot of them are in private credit commodities. We've had bonds with ABN AMRO that have been tokenized. We have Apex, one of the largest fund admins in the world, that have tokenized private funds. We've even had with Fastenera, even what we call permissioned stable coins. So all these different things, when we look at whether it's digital cash, e-money, and stable coins, we have been involved in those sort of things. Now, to your question, we've had a lot of work in Singapore and in Abu Dhabi around exploring 3643 for regulatory or government aspects of it. What makes it great is that we're able to tell the regulator, hey, whatever happens with these tokens, we could recover, we could control, and we can make sure that everything is above board. But it's not meant to replace ERC20, it's meant to complement it.
I'm interested, you spoke on a panel this morning called The Power of Open Standards. And I'm really interested in how much really regulatory environments, finance, tech, really rely these days on open standards. Why is it so important for us to build in open standards in the world we're in today?
It's fundamental. And the word I use is practicality. So we now have this massive Cambrian explosion of regulatory action in the U.S. Last year when I had the opportunity to present to Chairman Gensler and the FinHub, it was a bit crickets. It sounds like, okay, permission tokens, that sounds like something we would like, but we're not sure. With this new administration, this new SEC crypto task force, they're getting all sorts of really amazing innovation. But what do they do? How do they deal with it? So the idea is practicality. Have the industry coalesce around open standards. Now, when we talk about open standards, what exactly are we talking about? Well, anyone who's been in blockchain DeFi know the blockchains usually have these approval processes, right? Whether it's for interoperability, for data, for MPC, whatever. Point is that you had a community come together and say, this is the way we want to do a standard. And we all know them. ERC 721 and ERC 20 are part of them. I could do 4626 for the vault standard, 1155. And as we bring more and more of these open standards together, the regulators are going to look at this and go, as an industry, is this the way you guys think this is the best way to do this particular activity? And so it becomes a practicality where they go, yep. Everyone comes together and says, this is the way we want to do it, and we get that approval, and we can scale and go to market. So there are now dozens of open standards, realizing that the path that 3643 put forward is a viable path for them. 3643, unlike ERC 2721, started from humble beginnings, went through the Ethereum approval process, but went even further into the regulatory process. And so we work with ISO and ANA and other governments around the world to mature 3643 to a full financial standard. And that's never been done before, and it's a very exciting time.
You used to be a NASA aerospace engineer, and now you're working on this. Talk to me about why leave that and commit your time to these tokenized open standards. How did you make that shift?
Wow, yeah, it's a great thing. Well, first of all, you can't take cash to the moon, is what I say. So there's a part of me that thinks that all this digital assets and blockchain stuff will really hit an even greater stride once we see space and space economies come to fruition. Believe it or not, people don't realize how much financial systems break down when you're even trying to send a wire to the moon or across satellites. But for me, I've always been an engineer. I always loved solving really difficult problems. And what led me to NASA was to solve problems that no one had really ever looked at before. And then, unfortunately, the space shuttle was being sunset during my time. And so I was like, I feel like I got to a house party and everyone's like kind of left. So, but I worked on some cool projects. I have stuff in space, which is great. But I then did almost a 20-year career in finance. I worked in derivatives trading. I worked in stock loan, Delta One. I looked in collateral across all these great banks. And I saw DeFi come in DeFi Summer 2020. I go, oh, man, that is the future. And so then I jumped in full on into this. But as I say, I may have left the bank, but the bank hasn't left me. And so all this thinking about standards and regulatory stuff is imputed in me, but being very consistent with blockchain ecosystem values. Where those? Transparency, open source, open standards, community.
My final question, and we only have a few seconds left, but we're here at SmartCon. How are you working with Chainlink and what they're working on?
Chainlink has been a phenomenal partner in every aspect of the way. Chainlink is blazing new ground in many important areas, not just from a technology, but also from an institutional and regulatory point of view. You have all sorts of banks. You have Swift here. You have lots of great technology companies here. For 3643, we could have asked no better partner. We do a ton with Chainlink on the regulatory side in the U.S. We do a ton on the technical integration. So ACE, with automated compliance engine, gives us dynamic rule sets, and that just means in plain English we could do much more complex rules, so we can support much more complex assets. And then we also have Chainlink CRE as well and CCIP. So we're looking at the full suite of the technology, but the great part of what Chainlink has built and the people around it is that they're able to synergize that technology into real commercial outcomes. So it's an amazing, amazing conference to be at.
Dennis, thanks so much for joining us at the desk.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you, Dennis.
Cheers.
That was the president of the ERC 3643 Association, Dennis O'Connell. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Want market-moving insights at your fingertips? Download the CoinDesk app for news, prices, videos, and events on the go. Stay ahead of the markets with the Crypto Daybook America's newsletter. Get daily price updates, key trends, and analyses delivered straight to your inbox every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Sign up now at coindesk.com/newsletters. Hey everyone, you're watching CoinDesk Live. We're at Chainlink SmartCon, where the dominant conversation is the evolution of the tokenized economy. We're joined now by a key figure from one of the largest financial institutions in the world, one that is actively building the foundational infrastructure for this new ecosystem. Please welcome Nelly Zaltzman, Head of Platform Settlement Solutions for Connexus by JP Morgan. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for being here. Now, we are in the heart of the conference. Talk to us a little bit about what you've experienced so far, the energy that you've experienced, and the types of conversations you've been having.
It's quite packed and high energy here, and it's very exciting. You know, I'm seeing people from all different stripes. I even bumped into a colleague from our very own FX business, and he's just here out of general curiosity, looking to see how new tech can apply to our world.
Learning more about the Chainlink ecosystem. Well, we know that you're on a panel today. It's about going from POC to production, and your work is all about that, going from proof of concept to production. Talk to us a little bit about the ins and outs in that process of doing something like that at an institution like JP Morgan.
Yes, so I think the process has evolved a little bit. So I've been in the space since 2018. In 2018, 2019, 2020, et cetera, we would do POCs because we really were just learning about the technology and how to apply it to an enterprise, and we really just wanted to explore use cases. Now I think we're in a phase where we do have active products in production, and so when we do a POC, it's really more to bring in the ecosystem and get some of this interoperability so that parties feel comfortable with each other. And there's a lot of learning each other's operational processes and proving them out in this process. But I'm happy to say that the lifetime of a POC to production has shortened dramatically and is, you know, more our norm to go into production these days. So.
Nelly, I've heard for years that JP Morgan has just an army of folks who are working in blockchain. Very little was released for a long time about it. But as you see sort of the evolution of this tokenized economy, as you see how JP Morgan may want to play in it, what do you think is the role of one of the largest financial institutions in the world and what Connexus is doing?
Well, I think, you know, and Jamie's often said this, that technology is critical in financial institutions. We invest a ton. I think it is up to the financial industry to be its own innovation driver. Often people will say, well, how do you apply blockchain there are not enough enterprise tools, not enough solutions for privacy, it's not fit for a bank. Well, for all of that to happen, actors who have those requirements and that know-how need to step into the space and lead, and I think we've really been trying to take that leadership role for a decade now, and it really has borne fruit. So, you know, we talk a lot about JPMD, you know, that has been a North Star vision of ours. It's taken us the 10 years to think about how this would really work in a public ecosystem and what are the use cases and how we would launch it, and lots of trial and error and things like that. And when we speak on the infrastructure and our vision, it comes from a place of learning because we have sort of put in the time and effort on our side.
Let's talk about JPMD. The JPMD USD deposit token that's on Base, a public Ethereum layer 2.
Yes.
We talk a lot about private and permissioned usually when we're talking to the big financial institutions. Talk to me about that move, the decision to move from private walled garden to public blockchain.
Sure. So all of our products are always very much driven by the utility they bring our clients. And payments don't exist in a vacuum, I like to remind people. So when we look at what we've had traditionally on the permission system, our core use case when we started was more around treasury, right? And clients moving funds within the bank. And what we see now is a much more robust markets ecosystem developing, right, in the digital asset space. So tokenized real world assets, tokenized money market funds, you see tokenized equities now picking up speed. Our clients are sophisticated institutions who want to play in the best market fields that are available to them, right? And we want to enable them from a payments perspective. And so we have had this notion of a token that will live outside of JP Morgan for a very long time. It's been kind of our North Star goal ever since we started, you know, this on the payments journey. And right now we're seeing the right ecosystem come about for there to be use cases for our clients who want to, for example, engage in DVP for assets or make use of different protocol technology to maximize value and so forth.
I'm interested in this idea, you know, we've been talking a lot about stablecoins in the last bunch of months. You guys, I believe, have a deposit token. From your client's perspective, is there value in one versus the other? Are there uses for both that you see? Like, how do you look at the difference between a deposit token and a stablecoin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, there's room for all products. I don't take an absolutist view on anything. In a healthy ecosystem, right, there are always multiple products. Even on the traditional payment side, there's a million ways you can make a payment. So on our side, when we think about JPMD and the focus of Connexus right now, it's on these institutional use cases, treasury and markets participation. And when you think about what drives our clients, it's really maximizing where they put their liquidity for value. And so they'll selectively maybe move something out of the banking relationship to buy an asset, as I've alluded to before. But what's really important for them is then to kind of bring it back into the structure when they need it efficiently. And that's what JPMD and the deposit structure that's cohesive to our offerings is really good for. Stablecoins, I think, will have their use cases ongoing as they have proven out. You know, they've done a fair bit for the industry. When we look at them, we definitely think about it more in terms a little bit of the retail sector and how the retail sector will engage with remittances as well as digital assets.
We're at Chainlink SmartCon. We talked a little bit about the energy at the beginning of our conversation, but how are you working with Chainlink? How does Chainlink come into your operational flow?
Sure. Chainlink's been a great, you know, collaborator to work with. We've been talking to the team about a year now, a little more actually, and we did a proof of concept, as we discussed, with Ondo and Chainlink earlier this year to prove out that even our permission system can be quite efficiently interoperable with public blockchain, which is the goal, right? So if clients who are paying each other on our books want to settle a transaction for assets that is entered into on a public blockchain, there's absolutely no reason why we cannot work collaboratively with the industry to consume those events and automate the end-to-end process for our client experience. And, you know, Chainlink's been really great in that, in helping think through that and just supporting us in that thought process. So, yeah.
Nelly, thanks so much for joining us at the desk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nelly.
That was Head of Platform Settlement Solution for Connexus by JP Morgan, Nelly Saltzman. Sam, we are trucking right along.
It's cooking here.
It is cooking. What are you looking forward to over the next 2 days?
You know what? There's a couple of things I'm focused on right now. One is just, we get the opportunity to talk with such smart people who are building actively in the space every single day. And I just want to get more knowledge about that. So that number one is that. Two, I've been having this very existential thought in my head,
okay,
which is this idea of do these stable coins, these cross-chain payments. We heard about Sergey talking about supply chain payments and escrow and all of that. Is this whole technology about modernizing the modern money movement or about replacing it? And I think we are, if we look forward 5-10 years, it could go in either direction. And so I'm interested in just hearing from the people who are doing it on the ground to get a sense of how big the seismic shift is, because we know something is happening. What about yourself?
I mean, I just want to build on what you're saying. I think it's modernizing it, right? I think there's a place for people who are looking for an alternative financial system. There's like a lot of places in DeFi that people can go. But from all the conversations we've had here today and even this morning, the arrow is really pointing towards modernizing what's already out there, making things easier to use, more accessible, and we can do that with this technology. It doesn't always have to be this rebellion, I guess is the word.
I agree. I think, though, you talk to some hardcore Bitcoiners, and they feel very differently. And so there is a part of our crypto ecosystem which looks at this world and says, hey, we could do that too, and we don't need that because we want self-sovereignty, we want freedom, we want this or that. And then I think we have a bit of the sort of everyday realist approach, which is like, hey, these things are complicated, especially when you want to use this stuff in the real world. And that's why we're here, because we're so many people are doing that. So I guess where I come from is there are some that are looking to tear down and replace, and there's some looking to adhere and help build. And I think it's just an interesting conversation that is sort of at the center of what it means to be what side of crypto you're on.
I think the two can coexist. Do you think they can?
I think they have been, and I think more so now than ever. But I still think you see a lot of opportunity for some who are on the rebellious side of either.
Yeah.
I didn't think 2 years ago we'd be talking to JP Morgan.
Yep.
And here we are, which I think is an amazing development that we champion. Simultaneously, we can talk to some of the original cypherpunks, and they may lament the area that we're talking about today. So I think it's an unknown.
All right, well, we'll just have to see how things progress, and we'll be right here covering it every step of the way, Sam. All right, let's get to our next guest now. He's from a company that is the core infrastructure of finance today, processing trillions of dollars in daily transactions. We're joined now by Chris Perry, the president of Broadridge Financial Solutions. Chris, welcome to the desk.
Great to be here. Good afternoon. SmartCon is awesome.
SmartCon is awesome. What have you been up to today?
I did a keynote earlier in the day that was very exciting, a little energetic, dynamic, particularly thinking about how smart contracts, tokenization can completely change actually our personal lives. But every day I spend my time in the financial services market, so that's been a bit of a walk around. So many startups. You're just talking a moment ago about, revolutionary thing. I like evolutionary things. I like the concept of a hand reaching to pull another hand up. Today, finance is done in scale across these institutions. And that's how it does work today. At the same time, some of these small disruptive entities can start to reach their hand out and actually lift it forward. And that's what I think is going to be an important aspect of things. You mentioned Bitcoin a moment ago. The size of the Bitcoin market compared to the DLT repo market we do is like this.
Yeah.
But someday it will be bigger. And so that's the exciting thing of how they will come together.
I almost think, I was talking to someone from Robinhood yesterday, and we were just talking about when Robinhood first came out, they really were challengers and trying to reimagine a system, and now they're part of the system.
They are, absolutely.
And I think they're happy to be in that space. So I think you're right. I think it has to be a little bit of both. And
Schwab did the same thing many moons before we were ever around. They were not going to be able to discount brokerage. Well, now we see where they've evolved to. So it's really just a matter of time. Some won't make it, but that is the direction of flow.
Yeah.
You know, I want to talk about the financial plumbing. The theme of this conference is Finance Reimagined. What part of that plumbing really needs to be reimagined for us to get to the next version of finance or the future of finance?
Yeah. I like to refer to it as the arteries and the veins because it's truly what everything flows through. Broadridge settles $15 trillion per day in transactions. We communicate 7 billion investors per year. So we're really ensuring that that ecosystem of investments and the decision investments and the information flows. There are many dynamics around it that need to evolve, accelerate. Most importantly, the speed and the digitization of things. You know, clients want to receive what they want, where they want it, when they want it, and they want to be able to interact with that. So to me, the ability to personalize the communication is the biggest thing that can happen. And then there's objectivity inside of that, and all asset classes being able to be provided through intermediaries or direct. So overall, the system is working well today, but it needs to scale more as we tokenize. Remember, what tokenization will do is notional values can be very small, so the scale of democratization will accelerate immensely, and it has to be ready for that.
I'm just interested, I hear you talk, and I think that what Chainlink has solved in the crypto space, is very complementary to what you guys have been doing for quite a while. And I don't think people understand how much you need those systems in order to have what we can see on the front end of our wallets or the front end of our bank accounts. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about those synergies. How do you see what you're doing and what Chainlink is doing together?
Yeah, I think sometimes people talk about the old world of finance or, old finance or whatever, and then the new world and the DeFi world and all that. I mean, the reality is there's a financial world today. That financial world needs to be enabled by things like Chainlink to be able to put on-chain, tokenized with a full flow process into all the asset classes, to all the investors. And I think that's where the partnership happens between an infrastructure provider like Broadridge, where we have a platform that enables all asset classes, that we want to enable the new asset classes like alts, NFTs, things like that. And working with a Chainlink would allow us to go a lot faster than if we just try to do it on our own. And it's also an ecosystem. There isn't one DLT network, right? There isn't one token network. There's one internet. Okay, we all know there's only one internet. We all connect to the internet and it becomes one thing. Tokenization doesn't work that way. Actually, we need to make sure that there are industry standards and therefore the tokens can actually work, because there's no way you could have only one tokenized network. There's just too much volume going on, and the technology isn't as fast as modernized, say, equity trading technology, which is trading billions of shares per day. But this is a partnership.
Take that a little further for us. I mean, tell us how you're integrating Chainlink's different offerings as they become available.
Well, a Chainlink is more exploratory for us today. I think more of what we've done is we did a partnership with Digital Asset Holding a number of years ago. That began the launch of the largest institutional network for tokenized assets to trade on. 384 billion of notional value being traded per day. That's up from 100 billion not even that long ago, so that acceleration is happening. And then we've become a part of the Canton network, which is again a standardized environment where we are the validator as part of that network. And we will work with Chainlink and others who will continue to extend it, bring other asset classes on, particularly the asset classes that are more complicated, their settlement periods are longer. That's why alts and private equity, and we went after repos early because collateral's tied up between institutions. It lowers the cost to operate when you don't have to tie up collateral. And two departments inside the same institution who are lending between departments, they're tying up collateral in two places. So the tokenization changes the dynamic, and we think the same phenomenon will be able to be enabled in other investment type assets.
I mean, I look at really the beauty of tokenization is it truly enables 24/7 global opportunity for people to participate in the financial system. What are your institutional clients looking at the benefits of tokenization for?
Yeah, I love that you brought that particularly thing up, because when you talk about what's broken, it's not broken. The systems were never designed to be able to do 7, 24, 365 trading. Exchanges today are still doing bankers' hours. That's not really going to fly in a competitive global world. So we have to help enable them to be able to trade what these days are 6 days, 23-hour kind of environments on a global basis. And so this is where we have to modernize. You used that word a little earlier. The technology. The technology is there. That's the good news. The practices aren't yet. So we have to bring the technology and educate the institutions who are sitting on billions of dollars. Some have begun that process, like BlackRock and its fund, Fidelity, Franklin Templeton. They're actually beginning. The future's here now. It's actually happening. We have to bring it to more people, and that's the exciting part.
I know you highlighted in some notes you sent to us earlier the need for programmable compliance. Talk to us a little bit about that and how regulators might understand that, or what you might be up against when talking about programmable compliance with regulators.
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate in this moment that we have a Securities Exchange Commission in the U.S. that is thinking a lot more about how the future of transactions will play. I think the last administration was very caught up in a lot of regulatory change and regulation by enforcement and whatever. I think now we have an enlightenment around, okay, this is where the world is going, and that's important. The second part that's really important is everyone has to realize, everybody at SmartCon has to realize that governance is still critical. The SEC under Chairman Atkins has been very, very clear. These are still securities. Just because you tokenize them, they're still securities. So all the things that need to take place as part of a security has to take place. That's margin, that is all the asset servicing of dividends and flows and splits and everything to do with the process by which securities or tokens will be dealt with. And so we all have to make sure we get our head around that, because if we don't get our head around that, there's going to be a lot of people going, oh, are these real? Are these, under the 1939 Act? What are those? So I think people are getting that. And then what we've got to do is make sure in the process we're finding more optimized ways to do regulation, whether it's Reg NMS, which is an important thing. You're still going to trade things. It has to be best bid offer, things like that, even in these private exchanges that will take place. So I think it's really educating the regulators while the regulators get up to speed and open the doors for the modernized versions of the same things that used to be done, ideally more efficient, more cost-effective for investors. That's where everybody wins. They don't have to pass on costs. Actually, costs should be lowered. There should be less barriers to entry, which allows it to go beyond institutions. And now you're having the ability of this democratization to get to all investors in a very cost-effective way.
Chris, just quickly, because I know we're out of time, but I'm really interested in the idea of programmable compliance, especially as it works cross-jurisdiction. So, knowing that you might have one set of rules in Hong Kong or Singapore, another in Europe, another in the U.S., that could be part of a smart contract itself,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. I think there's two parts to that are important. Yeah. And we had a little bit of this during the global financial crisis when, in the middle of the window of the failures, different jurisdictions were thinking about different regulations. Mm-hmm. And finally, everybody sort of got it and said, we better be a little bit consistent. So I think one is, and you're starting to see the SEC and the European Commission start to talk more about how to do things on a global basis, because all jurisdictions want their tax dollars. Yeah. They don't want fraud. They don't want nefarious activity. So working in a consistent way to monitor, I think, is good for everybody. Then the second part is what smart contracts are smart contracts. They can have statements that will describe where that asset is owned, the ownership of that asset, and you can append that by the domicile by where you're an owner of it, and the rules can be applied inside of that. So I think that's still a big learning, but it's going to be real. And in the end, everybody has to file their tax returns, because one thing all sovereigns want is to get tax money. And that's one of the reasons why I think they will join forces to do this the right way. And the companies that are here that are disrupting and enabling are going to figure out, they're going to be part of the answer. Technology is always part of the answer to the problems that we run into.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us at the desk. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Have a good afternoon.
Yeah.
That was the president of Broadridge Financial Solutions, Chris Perry. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Want market-moving insights at your fingertips? Download the CoinDesk app for news, prices, videos, and events on the go. Stay ahead of the markets with the Crypto Daybook America's newsletter. Get daily price updates, key trends, and analyses delivered straight to your inbox every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Sign up now at coindesk.com/newsletters.
Hello and welcome back to CoinDesk Live. We are coming to you from Chainlink's SmartCon in New York City. We are now joined by Nate Holiday, the CEO of Make Infinite Labs and the co-founder of Space and Time. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
How's the event been going so far for you?
It's been great. I mean, there are so many institutions here, so many large banks here, so many builders in the crypto and blockchain industry, so it's been great. It's always
what are you expecting to get out of this event?
You know, we're working with a lot of banks, right? And so, you know, building reference architectures for the future. You know, the new stablecoin bill that passed, right, is really exciting, and a lot of people are building on it. We're a decentralized database or a tamper-proof database, so banks have a lot of business processes, a lot of data that lives off-chain, and to tokenize assets, they need a powerful database that can support them. So we're here to work with them, but we're also Chainlink has a great community, right? And our communities overlap a lot, and so we're here just to support the Chainlink community and build. We've been building for 4 years with Chainlink, so just continue to build out our partnership together.
What stuck out to you about Chainlink's community? You said you've been around for 4 years. The community is growing. It's not just, you know, folks who are interested in DeFi now. It's institutions. It's people like yourself. It's people who are building apps. Talk to us about the evolution of the community from your perspective.
Yeah, no, the Chainlink community is great, right? And when you look at communities, especially in the crypto and blockchain space, communities come and go, right? There's people that are in a community because they think like, you know, it's a new flashy, shiny object, and then there's people that are building a community to last, right? And I come from the Web 2 database world where you put a lot of time and energy and talent into building things that last, and it takes many decades to build that. And really the Chainlink community is here to stay, right? They've been strong from, you know, the 2018, 2019 years, and they're still strong, right? And it doesn't really matter what's happening in the market, right? They know the value of Chainlink and what Chainlink is building, and so they appreciate that, you know, things take a while to build lasting value in the world. And so that's been impressive for us, and we're the same mindset, right? You can't just build a database overnight. You have to build, you know, it takes about 10 years to build a mature database. And so our community and Chainlink's community understand the value of something that takes a long time and to persist for a long time after us.
You know, Sam, there was once a time when we would go to crypto conferences, and if the markets were looking as they are today, the energy would be deflated in the conference. Everyone would be so upset. They'd all be looking at their phones, they'd be watching prices, and that's not happening here, right? And I think that speaks to what you're saying. You know, the community is here. They're ready to build. They're not focused on what's happening in the market. They're focused on what's happening in the ecosystem, and I think that's a shift.
There's also, you know, I think what you said was really interesting, that it takes 10 years to build a mature database. You know, you can't worry about the day-to-day fluctuation if your goal is to build a decade in the future. But I'm interested in our audience understanding, what does it mean to have a decentralized database? Why do people need it? And, you know, I think there's probably a lot of consultancies out there that are nervous when they hear those things, right? Because they're in the business of trying to sell existing systems with partners they have, and you guys get to disrupt that.
Yeah, and look, I've been in the database world for 15 years before I started Space and Time and before we built the decentralized protocol and fixed really the database problem in Web3. And like databases have been around forever, right? And they're great. And they do a lot of workload. They do huge, you know, they collect a lot of data. They process a lot of data. Businesses have been built all across the world on data. You have the largest databases at Apple and PayPal and Wells Fargo. Like all these have massive databases. But what happens when those massive businesses want to move their data on-chain, right? They want to tokenize their assets. They want to build really cool assets around their applications. You can't do it in a traditional database, right? Because why? You can tamper with the database. You can manipulate a database. You have a lot of actors intersecting the consultants, internal employees. You have external hackers that can get it. And if you're running an on-chain application, these databases can't be tampered with, right? There's no intermediary that can say, like, was this database process accurate or not, or should we let this database, you know, process actually transact? And so the same with blockchain. And so, you know, we all of that database processing that lives off chain has to move on chain if we're going to tokenize the world's assets. And a lot of the banks are now doing it, right? So they need a database that's verifiable, that can't be tampered with, and can be trusted.
Give us a real world example here. Talk to us maybe about one of your clients. How are they using your technology to solve a problem that they have?
Yeah, look, like we have a few different platforms and technology, but like if you're building an options market, right, and you need to be able to, make sure that nobody's changing the option price history of something, right? They use our database to ensure that no one can go and insert data in a database to change the option price history, right? So if you're building a DeFi protocol or a lending protocol is another example, right? You want to give someone a loan, right? Well, what's their on-chain history? What's their off-chain history? Based on their on-chain and off-chain history, like should they get a loan that's more favorable to somebody that has probably less history, right? And how do you determine, right, the size of that loan and the maturity of that loan, et cetera? So we have a lot of different use cases that we power, but it's everything that happens in off-chain world is now going to start happening on-chain, right? We've seen the stablecoin legislation out of Washington, and all of these banks are now looking to bring this all on-chain, and they need databases that power that.
Is the infrastructure ready for all of that data to come on-chain?
Well, before Space and Time, there wasn't a database that could actually hold it, right? There was a lot of off-chain databases, but you can never bring off-chain databases to on-chain without the right tamper-proof database, right, processes. So look, we can do billions of transactions. We can do sub-second ZK proofs to verify any transaction is accurate. So we now have the database that can support large enterprises and institutions. And it's what we've been building over the last 4 or 5 years. So now it is, but before we solved the database problem, it wouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. We think about these decentralized databases, verifiable compute, a lot of stuff that you guys are working in. I know you've launched Dreamspace, which is an AI app generator. Tell us a little bit about the intersection of AI and the stuff that you're building.
Well, first of all, AI and blockchain really care about data, and they care about tamper-proof data, right? If you have AI agents that are out there transacting on our behalf, you got to be able to trust that it's actually verifiable and it can be audited, and you can prove that nothing has gone astray, right? It operated how we expected. With Dreamspace, our AI app generator, right now you can create an application, you can deploy it on a blockchain, you can get that smart contract audited, and it really enables anybody in the world to be able to participate in crypto. If you look at Electric Capital, they had a report that there's 27,000 app developers or developers in crypto, right? But A16 just released a report that says there's 70 million people that participate in crypto a year. So what do the 70 million people do if they're not the 27,000 developers, right? We need to create a platform where they can be creative, right? I think, look, we're all put on this earth to create. And sadly, there's been a couple of large companies that are creating, and then everyone else in the world is consuming now. And so we got to flip that switch, right? We need to be able to allow creators to create cool things. And so if you're not a developer, you have to be given a platform that you can create apps on. So it's a prompt generation with a chatbot. You can go and say, build me a DeFi lending protocol, build me a dog walking app, I have a bakery in New York City and I want an application that can take orders and sell my products. You can literally build any application that you want, and it's all integrated into Space and Time's database, and it can be deployed across any blockchain.
And is I love the idea I can have a bakery in New York and I can build my business through that. But, does that group, those entrepreneurs need to know that they're building in blockchain at that point?
That's right.
Well,
yeah.
For them, it's just the tool to use.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right. And at the end of the day, it's an application that can be built. Anyone can build on it. You don't have to have an Ivy League education to build on this. You can deploy a payment system with Stripe, or you can deploy a payment system that has the rails of crypto. Somebody could pay you for, if you opened a bakery in New York, they could pay you in Link. They could pay you in Space and Time. They could pay you in whatever they want. But you as a creator, you can enable that, right? You can decide, do you want to take credit card payments? Do you want to take crypto payments? And it really opens up the world to anyone in the world, because in the US, we think of this financial structure as very defined. But you look at a place like Indonesia, right? which half of them don't have bank accounts, right? And so it really creates this flywheel effect that they can create their business and they can start to take payments on crypto rails, and really that will be their first real kind of banking account, right? Although it's a crypto wallet, although it's a crypto account, right? It's a real onboarding onto the financial market, which is exciting all over the world.
Nate, thanks so much for joining us at the desk. It was a pleasure having you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
That was the CEO of Make Infinite Labs and co-founder of Space and Time, Nate Holiday. All right, Sam, we are trucking right along. At the beginning of the show, we were talking about regulation. We were talking about market structure. I believe Adam said he thinks it's going to pass within the next 6 months. I was at a dinner the other night, and the icebreaker question was, do you think market structure is going to pass, and when do you think it's going to pass? And so I'm going to ask you, I think you think it's going to pass.
I actually don't know.
Okay.
I will say, and you and I have been doing a lot of traveling, talking to a lot of people, and I've had some conversations with some people who think that there's a little bit more challenge than we think in some of these, even in the Genius Act, and whether that will get passed fully to the desk of the president. So I think that crypto is one industry that sometimes is willing to champion any news because it helps us feel good about ourselves, and sometimes we need it, like days like today. But on the other hand, I think that just because we think the work has been done doesn't mean the work is ready. And so I'm wondering if it's going to pass on the first. Is it going to take some revisions? I wonder about the government shutdown and how that's affecting this, what's happening behind the scenes around these things. So I'm being a little bit more cautious just because I think there is so much optimism it's going to pass that I usually like to take the other side of that trade.
I appreciate that. And I think there's a lot of validity to what you're saying, right? We're sitting in November now. For a long time, there were many in this industry who were saying, both publicly and behind closed doors, if it doesn't pass by the end of the year, maybe it doesn't get prioritized next year as we head into midterms. And so that's kind of where I sit. But I think there's another piece that we're seeing from our conversations here today is almost all of the major financial institutions globally are using this technology. They're not experimenting. It's not a proof of concept. They're using it. And so I think there is incentive on that side to pass something. Whether it looks like the draft we see now, I think that can be debated. And my hope, Sam, is that it does pass next year. Because if it doesn't, I think we run the risk of going back to a version of a state that we were in before, right? Without clear legislation, it's up to the agencies to kind of interpret the laws as they will. It's up to the states to interpret the laws as they will. And so I really hope that we get some clear direction so that the industry can continue to build and move forward.
I generally agree. Okay. I also think one more thing to throw in is we are going to run into the midterms.
Yes.
And which I think is what you're leading at there. And I think that becomes a sticking point if we haven't gotten there. So I think it's actually in the benefit of both parties to come together and figure out how do we do this together and collectively, and figure out our opportunity to sort of move finance ahead, move the opportunities of the modernization of finance we were talking about earlier. And I'm just excited for the possibility of having something, even if it's not the final.
Yeah. Well, we have Genius. That's something. It sounds like there's healthy debate being had on Capitol Hill from both the Senates and the Democrats. And so, yes, progress is being made. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned indeed.
All right, our next guest joins us live from the desk. If you're just joining us now, we are at Chainlink SmartCon in New York City, and we're joined by the founder and CEO of 21X, Max Heinzel. Hello.
Hi, Jen. Hi, Sam.
How are you?
Pleasure to be here.
Welcome.
Pleasure to have you here. Now, let's just lay a foundation here for our audience. Tell us a little bit about 21X. What's the problem you're solving for capital markets?
So 21X is the first financial institution to actually enable on-chain matching, trading, and settlement. It's kind of the case that you could say we're like a decentralized financial market infrastructure providing both primary and secondary market, and making use of new capital market infrastructure regulation that really allows us to disintermediate the form and way how we go about capital markets in today's traditional form.
What is... Give us, I'm hearing an accent. So I'm assuming that you do a lot of work in Europe, and that's an area that you might be focused on. I was on a panel earlier today with a bunch of folks in the European markets, and they were really talking about the specific needs of that market compared to, for example, the U.S. or other parts of the world. How do you think that Europe is approaching stablecoins, these new digital assets, the investing opportunities? Is there a hunger for it? Is there a desire? Or is it something that people are still a little bit conservative about?
Oh no, I mean, it is actually the case that already over the last couple of years in Europe, you've been seeing specific EU member states coming up with national regulation. It's actually the case that since March 2023, we have now EU harmonized regulation, and it's actually, it marks, in my view, a very interesting point in time when looking at, the fact that we now have DLT leveraging market infrastructure regulation that allows us to, think of capital markets in a new form and manner, right? I always like to say, if you take a look at how capital markets function today, you have special purpose roles, whether it is for custody, for brokering, for CSD, transfer agency, exchanges and whatnot. Under the EU DLT regime, it is actually now possible for the first time in the history of capital markets to actually combine what you could call DTCC and NASDAQ in the US today. And there is, listening to what you were saying earlier, there's a very clear framework for that, even though you can call it like still the beginning stages of that regulation, being implemented in a sandbox format. So kind of trialing, but at the same time, we see progress from the industry, like financial institutions, when we're looking at custody services, brokerage services, and the likes, that they are implementing, also infrastructure, that they're starting to adopt, picking up on the subject of tokenization and seeing the benefits of tokenization of assets. We have stablecoin regulation, we have the adoption of stablecoins, and so it's just, I think, a logical next step that we're actually now seeing the likes of financial market infrastructure providers that are leveraging DLT to really also deliver on benefits, right, that were not, that were not able to be realized before. I think that is really the differentiator. Today, we often get the question of, is tokenization driving liquidity, right? And tokenization is not driving liquidity. In the next step, market infrastructure that is actually leveraging blockchain technology will actually then, in the next step, aggregate liquidity. And I think it's important to note that we're not a closed shop, but an open market infrastructure. So it's kind of at the intersection of TradFi and DeFi, and we're seeing significant adoption in Europe. But so are we also witnessing what is happening here under the administration of Trump, and having spoken to the regulators here in the US, we couldn't be more excited to be entering also the US now.
Mm-hmm. Break that down a little bit more for me. Sam and I were just talking about regulation in the United States. We're now talking about European regulation. For a long time, Europe was ahead of the United States. What are some of the similarities and differences between how the two different jurisdictions are operating? And do you see one as better than the other?
Well, I think that I think that what is happening now in the U.S., right, is kind of like I think you call it in English picking up, right? Like kind of like catching up, right? And it's gathering momentum. You have the Genius Act, right? You have clear regulation for stablecoins. Then there is, I think, a path that the U.S. regulator is taking in terms of also, giving exemptive reliefs. Mm-hmm. So having had those conversations with SEC and Crypto Task Force already a few months ago and showing them what we've done in the EU, how we've gone about, getting clearance from the likes of the highest regulatory bodies in the EU, right, including like the European Securities Market Authority, the European Central Bank, also the national competent authorities. This is a learning process, and this was, I would say, a very, going through the scrutiny of the regulators, having to answer thousands of questions, right, in order to really, after the 2.5-year process, to become the first in Europe to be able to operate markets on DLT. And I think learning now more about the approach in the US, I think US has a very good chance of picking up, being, still in the process of forming regulation. That is, I think, a very important point, right, to drive adoption. But obviously, it is the case that the regulators are open to explore, new forms of business models, right? As long as they can ensure that it is compliant, secure, and still bearing, with the principles of what we have today in capital markets, like customer protection and the likes. And I think this is what is getting me as an entrepreneur particularly excited about, realizing on the vision of connecting capital markets globally, right, on a unified ledger to drive, issuance, distribution, trading, settlement, all of that on chain, and, delivering on benefits that we couldn't deliver on before. Yeah.
And Max, you kind of said you guys are very excited to come to the U.S. What does it look like when 21X comes here? How are you going to sort of bring your vision and your reality to market?
So I think what's important to understand is, given that we already have, the go in the EU, and we have, realized what we call, something that is like making use of blockchain for matching, trading, and settlement, primary and secondary markets. For us, we would like to do as much of a copy-paste of that market infrastructure and deploy that now in the US, right? It's about time to market. It's about also the efficiency gains that we can realize. It's about liquidity pooling, right? Bringing assets from the US to Europe, from Europe to the US, right, in tokenized form. And I think that what we're looking to do here now is to obtain a set of licenses, which include obviously, an alternative trading system license, a broker-dealer license, and also other licenses like transfer agency, to be up and running in, say, the next 6 to 9 months here in the US. We're looking to do that out of New York. But yeah, I think that in a nutshell really gives you an idea of what is our strategy. We're trying to reuse as much as we can, and see how that goes in the conversations with the SEC. Yeah.
Stark difference, I think, from conversations we might have had a year ago with foreign crypto companies coming to the United States. So positive news to hear. Max, thank you for joining us at the desk.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Max.
That was the CEO of 21X, Max Heinzle. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Want market-moving insights at your fingertips? Download the CoinDesk app for news, prices, videos, and events on the go. Stay ahead of the markets with the Crypto Daybook America's newsletter. Get daily price updates, key trends, and analyses delivered straight to your inbox every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Sign up now at coindesk.com/newsletters.
Welcome back to CoinDesk Live. I'm Jen Sanasi here with my co-host Sam Ewan, and we are at SmartCon in New York City. Our next guest represents a true giant of traditional finance, which is now moving on chain. We are joined by Alireza Dorfad, Managing Director and Head of Market Data and Services at Deutsche Börse Group. Hello.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Something I am starting to learn is that traditional institutions have been wanting to move on chain for a long time, and they've been spending time figuring out what it means from regulatory perspective, depending on what jurisdiction they're in. So I just want to hear from you, how long have you been considering going on chain, and what were some of the considerations you made along the way?
Thank you very much. I think for us as Deutsche Börse, specifically because we are actually a large entity with a lot of subsidiaries whose brands are potentially even more known than Deutsche Börse itself. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction, Eurex is one of the largest derivatives exchanges worldwide, part of Deutsche Börse. 360T is an FX platform. We've got the energy exchange EX together with Nodal, also here in the US, a big player. And of course, we've got Clearstream, which is a big custodian and post-trade player in Europe. And if you take all of these together, we of course have the whole value chain within capital markets. And if you then take, let's say, players like stocks who are in the index play, you see that similar to many of the colleagues that I'm meeting here that are from Euroclear, from FTSE, from CME, all of them have key ingredients that are part of this transition from TradFi to DeFi. And for us, it was always the question, how do we actually play this? And because we are a multi-asset class company, because we are integrated from trading, clearing, settlement, custody, it was very natural for us to see, can we actually do something that we're doing in the traditional finance world, also in the digital asset realm? And we've been building it for a couple of years, but I'm very honest, it's really been taking a long time until institutional adoption has reached the stage where it really makes sense for all of the investments that we're doing, but we're seeing it being at a tipping point really now.
Mm-hmm. You know, Reza, I was at a dinner last night, and one of the conversations we had was that there were certain companies that got in a little too early into blockchain, right? IBM was one of them that came up where they actually went very hard, very early, and then realized the market really wasn't ready for them. And, you know, they're still involved in some respects. You know, I can imagine there's a lot of people who are doing what you guys are, which is, hey, we want to play the game. We need to build in this infrastructure, and we need to figure out what our role is in it. And then, but really, timing is so key. You know, how much of your release is based on patience, understanding where we are in the market, making partnerships with the people in this room? You know, like, why did you jump in when you decided to actually jump in and come out with this?
That's actually a very good question, because for us, this is really something where we are not only betting on, but we really are all in. We acquired Crypto Finance, which is really a native broker and custodian in the crypto asset space already a couple of years back. And they are the backbone of many of the things that we're doing today, because they are really, really crypto native players. And for us, I have to say, the partnerships that we have been seeing within the ecosystem, the announcement of BlackRock, but also our announcement, the work with Chainlink that we're doing, the work that we're doing with Circle on the stablecoin side, all of this is bringing us a step closer. But I have to say, you have to have patience. And this is a little bit a problem with VC-funded startups, because patience is not something that is an ingredient of their DNA. But I mean, for a TradFi player that has a high margin, very, very good running engine, it is actually easy to divert millions of dollars into an investment which you believe will pay off in the long term. And going from the traditional to the digital space is something that we're really, really adamant on and want to push forward.
You mentioned the Chainlink announcement. You're bringing your data, your regulated market data on chain. Talk to us a little bit about how this is going to work and why now is the right time.
Absolutely. What we're seeing is that many of the dApps which are on chain are often consuming retail-grade data. And to be honest, the latency, the data quality is not sufficient if you're thinking about institutional-grade decision-making. And specifically when more traditional finance players want to come on-chain, want to actually, specifically when you're thinking about tokenized securities, you really need to have the same backbone in terms of infrastructure, in terms of data, that you have in the traditional finance space. And for us, it is a play where we're working with Chainlink, where we have a selected realm of data in the FX, in the equity, in the derivative space, which we're really trying to push on chain to see what actually the adoption is. And we're already seeing traction there, but these are, let's say, the games that you have to play to see how much do you have to invest in at what point. And Chainlink is a great partner, to be honest, to actually do this.
When you know, we read the press release, the next generation of regulated financial products. Give us a real-world use case. How are your customers utilizing this today, or how will they be using it soon?
Absolutely. So I think if we think about the overall cycle of a trade in terms of issuance, trading, clearing, settlement, custody, if you think about and I would really say the traditional finance steps that need to be taken and how many intermediaries are involved and how many reconciliations need to be done, that we all are, let's say, looking at the same data and transactions. On-chain, this is happening more or less automatically without anybody being involved. This means that for a transaction to go through, to be settled, to be at the end also transported from one to the other, it's not the same infrastructure. And therefore, the data that you have needs to be even cleaner, because there is no human intervention. Nobody can make a margin call, right? And therefore, it's super important that we have the right rails in place and also the right data in place to actually make this cycle as perfect as it is. And we are just one ingredient as a market infrastructure players. There will be many others that need to be there, but this interoperability that we've built in the TradFi space will need a couple of years to go until it's also on chain. So it's small steps, to be honest.
Sorry, can I just follow up with one question, which is, I'm interested when you talk about the idea of going from a trade to settlement to custody and all the steps in between. In the old world of finance, there was also people who were making money along the way.
Absolutely.
Right, and now when the automation that's being brought, the opportunity for this to happen on chain at lightning speed also seems to be disruptive to the way people used to make money.
Absolutely.
So how do you square that as a company who's also in the business of trying to make sure you're profitable?
I think specifically look at the post-trade. This is the most interesting play, because settlement and custody is such an important part of Clearstream, which is part of Deutsche Börse Group. And we have to be very honest with ourselves before somebody else disintermediates us. We'd rather disintermediate ourselves, which means that we want to create the perfect rails on chain that are more efficient than they are today, less expensive than they are today. But then at the end, we're doing this for our customers' benefit, because they will want a partner that can bridge the traditional and the new world. And because we have both rails, we will be able to go from anybody who is this part of the axis or the other, and in between, and also give them the time to transition when they want. So we understand this problem, and we want to be part of the solution at the end.
You talk about the data having to be super clean and super quality because there are less humans along the way to catch mistakes, and the repercussions are much bigger, right?
Yes.
You have all of these institutions who have access to this data and smart contracts that are making decisions based on this data. How are you going to ensure that the data is super clean, super quality, and that these repercussions are not going to be felt at mass scales?
I have to say that when we think about the traditional finance space, we have, let's say, thousands and millions of transactions at Deutsche Börse based on our overall multi-asset and also from, let's say, issuance to clearing, where we are testing this data every day. So this is not something that's new. It is part of our DNA to produce high quality data, because all of our intermediaries and also market players and members are trusting in this data. So, which means if you take something that is 99.999% true and bring it on chain, we hope that also our customers will trust this data the same way that they're trusting it in the traditional finance space. And of course, it costs us something to bring it there. It costs us something to integrate it into the on-chain world. But seeing the traction there and also the institutional adoption now more and more coming, we are absolutely clear that this is the path that we want to take.
Reza, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing. It was a pleasure having you at the desk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Reza Dorfat from Deutsche Börse Group. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Want market-moving insights at your fingertips? Download the CoinDesk app for news, prices, videos, and events on the go. Stay ahead of the markets with the Crypto Daybook America's newsletter. Get daily price updates, key trends, and analyses delivered straight to your inbox every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Sign up now at CoinDesk.com/newsletters.
Hello and welcome back to CoinDesk Live. We are coming to you from New York City where Chainlink's SmartCon is underway. I'm Jen Sanasi. This is Sam Ewan. We are nearing the end of our stream. We have one more interview coming up, so everyone who's watching at home, make sure you stay tuned. Sam, I want to talk about the conversations we've been having here at the desk. You know, so often when we talk about the institutions that are coming into the space, it feels like, you know, there was an explosion of institutions that are now here and they're building because we have regulation. But what we're learning is they've been thinking long and hard about this for years, far long before the Genius Act was signed, far long before we were discussing market structure. And I think that it is a signal that the builders in the space are doing the right thing. You know, we are maturing. People have been thinking about this a long time. It's not a fly-by the seat of your pants industry that we sometimes like to say.
Yeah, I think, look, we shouldn't forget that crypto right now is, depending on the day, between a $3 and $4 trillion industry. That's still a sizable amount of money, and a lot of these companies, both big and small, want to participate in it. I think they recognize crypto is here. They probably disagree on how much it's going to, again, replace or augment the current financial situation. But I think that you know, I think of the conversation we just had with Reza, and for him to say we are all in, and that we are trying to disrupt our own businesses in order to get ahead of someone else disrupting us, right? I think that's the right way to look at it and think about it. In the same way that you know, if we look back when we say, you know, Sony could have embraced MP3 technology and been on the forefront and got ahead of Apple doing that, but they didn't. They were too protective of what they had, and they didn't recognize there was a revolution coming. And so I think that's what we're seeing here is people saying, we're not going to make that mistake again. And some are going to, you know, not be around for it, and they're going to go away. But a lot of really smart people are here to say, we are involved, we are participating, we are beyond the proof of concept stage. And we're just playing this game because what else can we do?
As you were speaking, I was reminded of the Blockbuster video booth that we had at Consensus. I don't remember which company sponsored that booth, but it really is that Blockbuster dilemma, right? No one wants to be Blockbuster when the Netflixes are coming up behind you, building a whole new system, and pushing you out.
Nor do they want to be Redbox, which was them trying to go after Blockbuster and not succeeding at it.
I will say I did use Redbox a few times.
Doesn't surprise me, Jen.
Okay. Let's get to our next guest. Our next guest is the Group Head of Innovation and Digital Assets at Euroclear. Jorgen Wakanin joins us now. Hello, Jorgen. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you very much.
All right, we are winding down our live stream. The event is going to continue on. I know you've been here today. Let's lay a foundation. Talk to us about how Euroclear is working with Chainlink.
So, you know, we have in our purpose, innovation. Our purpose is we innovate to bring safety, efficiency, and connections to financial market for sustainable economic growth. So that's super important. And what we're trying to do, basically, we service today 42 trillion of assets under custody. And we're trying to make this conversion between DeFi and TradFi, and Chainlink is the perfect actor that has understood that and is at the forefront of what they're doing, trying to bridge this exact gap. And that's, I believe, in essence, what Sergey was trying to say during his keynote today. And so we are participating to the key initiatives with Chainlinks around corporate actions, lifecycle management.
And I believe you spoke on a panel, the future of unified ledgers.
Yeah.
And you were talking about this problem that your product, the Unified Fabric, is trying to solve. Can you give us like an example of what the Unified Fabric is and how it's bringing your ideas to market?
So if you look back at what happened in Europe and in many markets over the last few years, we have seen an emergence of a lot of kind of initiatives bringing expertise, skills into this industry, but most of them have been siloed. So, you know, you lack interoperability, you create fragmentation. That's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. And then you see now more and more new concepts around public and private consortiums around unified ledger. The question is, what are you trying to solve for? So are you trying to show that you can move a token from platform A to platform B? You know, that's been demonstrated. Are you trying to connect supply and demand? And we see that, you know, there are several attempts, and the European Central Bank is as well having a big focus on the concept of unified ledger. So that can definitely be a way forward. Now we have to be mindful that while you might create the proper infrastructure to do that, you'll still have legal, ops, and other kind of things to consider. So I think it's an end-to-end process to reimagine. And maybe to make it clear, in case that wasn't clear yet, there's not going to be one to rule them all. So I think, the real world is unified ledgers, and how can we orchestrate amongst all them to make the capital flow?
I want to come back to your partnership with Chainlink. I know that Euroclear was a key participant in an initiative with Chainlink, like you were just saying. Swift DTCC also participated to tackle the $58 billion corporate actions problem, like you were just telling us. Just unpack that for us. Explain to us what the initiative does, what the corporate actions problem is, and how this combination of AI, oracles, and blockchain came together to create a solution.
So in order not to last half an hour on the topic.
Yeah, I know. It was a big one.
Right. It's a huge one. Let's maybe summarize the key takeaways, saying that the way things are built historically is on a very sequential value chain, meaning that every actor, when you have a corporate action, has to go through a similar process. And that creates operational risk and financial risks. And on top of that, I think, one of the great solutions that this market initiative was actually solving is showing, first of all, you don't have to antagonize AI and DLT. They amplify each other. So, with the right golden source of record, which is something that is of high importance, with the right consensus mechanism and with the right flows, you are able to solve basically one of the biggest pain points in the post-trade.
I want to focus on this report you guys did, which talks about that you were laying the groundwork for tokenized public equity. And from your perspective, is this still a missing piece? Like, what's the challenge there that Euroclear is bringing?
So, I think we're trying to act as a global market infrastructure. I don't believe there's one single missing piece. It's a sequence of things that we need to solve as an ecosystem. And we have shown that we are able to collaborate, especially with DTCC, Clearstream, other companies as well, when it comes to the greater good of the market. Because you can try to tackle a small part of the value chain that's still going to help the market advance globally, but it's not unlocking the full value as it should for the client. We're very focused on the client value and what it brings. So, let's try to have a holistic view of what it actually brings, what's the hype, what's the value and infrastructure that is holding 42 trillion of assets for the client can actually help changing.
Can you give us some insight into some of the conversations you've had here at SmartCon and some of the takeaways you're going to go home with and apply to Euroclear?
So, people are trying to figure out how a company like Euroclear is going to evolve, knowing every fundamental change that is happening today. And I think it's important to remind people that we have been in business for around 6 decades, and we have been able to cope with any kind of innovation, any kind of financial innovation, technological innovation, or even in kind of crisis. And we have been able to support the growth of the capital markets, in a safe and gradual way. And tomorrow is going to be no different. Maybe the challenge we're seeing now globally is the pace of innovation, because we have to remind people that we're not coming alone. We're a systemic infrastructure, and we bring a full ecosystem with us. So we want to become this change agent that is going to support the ecosystem to evolve together with us. And what we're seeing here is the DeFi meets TradFi, and that's kind of amazing. Imagine a few years ago, you wouldn't have this kind of conversation. And so we are moving from everything siloed to everything collaboration. We recognize the value each of us brings into the ecosystem, and we try to make sense of how we can collaborate together. I think, that's the most important things. And the conversation we're having with them, their agility, their innovation, the way they think about the new world, and what we bring in terms of stability, trust, and ecosystem are a perfect combination to reimagine the future.
Jürgen, I'm interested. I think what you're talking about is a very big and very complex system.
It is.
And so when we talk about this idea of this sort of unified layer, for me it sort of has to work 24/7. The idea of tokenized stocks right now compared to equities on the NYSE, which have open times, closed times. We are dealing with something which is going to happen at the speed of internet, which is completely global, which needs to understand all the jurisdictions and how they behave. It seems like there's a tremendous amount of data, coordination that all has to happen. And so when we think about that, where do you think we are in that process? I don't think we're today where this is in effect, but I think we're getting a lot closer than we were.
That's a challenging question.
Give us what you want.
No, it's super interesting because usually in big innovation, like 3 phases: the readiness phase, the adoption phase, and the scale phase. You can basically say each phase is 5 to 7 years. We basically are past the readiness phase. Mm-hmm. So we are, in a gray area between where we should be and where the market is currently. But it's important that we give back a sense of size as well and scale. I think you mentioned just earlier that, the full crypto market is 4 trillion. Euroclear in the last 4 or 5 years has grown his assets under custody more than 100% of the crypto market.
Yeah.
So we are still evolving fast, but we recognize that we need to sync with the innovation that is happening today, and that's very important. But at the same time, I think it's important to change the conversation from being tech-driven, what the tech allows us to do, to a business-driven and a value-driven conversation around, okay, what problem are we trying to solve? How can actually get to scale? And how can we ensure everyone in the ecosystem finds a space to grow?
I mean, I equate it to the idea, I remember, I'm old enough to remember the first Amazon search box for books.
Okay.
And really but that was trying to be about, can we get something from an online order to your house? Like, that's all the problem they were trying to solve. They hadn't thought as much about supply chain and drop shipping and all of the stuff that they deal with. And then it became the shopping layer of the internet, right? In the same way AI is allowing OpenAI to try, which is a lot more than chatbots were a few years ago. So it feels like this is sort of a similar challenge, which is we have to walk before we run, and maybe we're in the jogging stage right now.
I used to say that the smart contract is going to be the contract what the smartphone was to the phone. That's the direction of travel. And when you basically think about what a smart contract is, and all the data it has, public, private, known, unknown, and the way it moves, it changes the way you think about infrastructure. We are an infrastructure at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And so, the way you build roads, the way you allow assets to flow has to be reinvented. And so it's a huge project, it's a huge challenge, but it's not the first one, and we are definitely coping with it.
I think I'm going to steal that, by the way. Smart contract to contract,
that was really
smart phone to phone. Great soundbite.
If I hear you say it, I'll make sure to ding you for copyright.
That's the good thing with infrastructure. We give it for free.
Oh, look at that.
I just want to ask you, you mentioned Euroclear has been around for more than 6 decades. Yep. You talk about the pace of innovation that you're trying to keep up with. It sounds challenging for a firm that's been around for 60 years to now start moving at the pace as maybe a startup that's been around for a year. Is there a challenge or a push and pull there?
So, as I mentioned at the intro, our purpose is we innovate. Mm-hmm. That are the 2 first words that applies to all the 5,000-6,000 employees of Euroclear, and we all innovate in that direction. Of course, it's a challenge. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, as I mentioned, look back at every innovation that happened over the last decades. We have been able to cope with that. Mm-hmm. So our organization, in its DNA, is innovation ready. Mm-hmm. And so, it's just a continuum. What we have to realize, and that's the work we're doing, with the risk mitigation framework, with the GBBC, for example, it's Euroclear, Clearstream, DTCC, GBBC, Layer 1, Layer 0. Everyone is in the same room trying to figure out what it takes to transform a village. So it's not necessarily just about having the platform and the core capabilities to be able to cope with that. How do you basically adapt your risk framework, your ways of working? You mentioned 24/7. You are specific risks to public blockchain, specific risks to oracles, and everything that comes with it. We need to be ready for that. And the fact that now the industry is focusing on that might be a good signal. It might be the last mile. I know you have heard several times that next year is going to be the year. But now we have like more and more hints that industries and companies are transforming from inside to be more and more ready to cope with the new kind of assets.
Jorgen, thank you so much for joining us at the desk and wrapping day one of our live stream with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
That was the Group Head of Innovation and Digital Assets at Euroclear, Jorgen Waknin. All right, Sam, so key takeaway today, smart contracts are to contracts as the smartphone was to the phone. Thank you to Jorgen for giving us that note to end on.
I'm going to be using that. Maybe I'll write a post about it. Yeah, I think what Jorgen was saying reinforces a lot of what we heard here today, which is we didn't speak to that many entrepreneurs who weren't, just starting their businesses.
Yeah.
Maybe we talked to move industries and a couple of folks who are still in the building phase, but a lot of people here are endemic companies who are pivoting their offering to recognize the transformational nature of blockchain, which is kind of what we all have wanted for years, and it's kind of exciting to see that is where we're at.
Mm-hmm. I think it perfectly encapsulates the theme here, finance reimagined. These are established financial firms, established financial brands, reimagining what they could look like in the future so that they don't end up like the Blockbusters and the BlackBerries of the world.
The Blockbusters and the BlackBerries, yes. But look, we have JP Morgan, we have Euroclear, we have a bunch of folks who are tried and true organizations who you probably, if you said this to them 5 years ago, they would have said, why would I spend any time in that?
100%.
Especially JP Morgan, at least from what their public face was saying. And I think that what Sergey and the Chainlink team has done is bring together a very smart group of people who are able to sort of talk about, no, if you're not building now, you might be disintermediating yourself out of existence in the future, and if not now, when?
Well, the conversations continue tomorrow. We are going to be back for day 2 at Chainlink's SmartCon right here at 2 p.m. Sergey Nazarov is going to join us at the desk again tomorrow. So if you missed that conversation, you get to see another one. And if you missed any of the conversations we had here today, they will be on demand on CoinDesk.com and all of our social platforms. Thank you so much for sticking with us today. For Sam Ewan, I'm Jen Sanasi. We'll see you tomorrow.